Well, I've managed to dig up some top secret information from the new Trump administration budget proposal, and I did so by going to what you might consider to be an unlikely source. I'm talking about laudatory information about the Trump budget. Hi, this is Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and this episode of Right Angles brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. And men, I did sort of opposition research, if you want to call it that. I read multiple stories from the Washington Post about the Trump budget and found a lot to like about it. And so here's a quick summary of some of the things that I noticed from the stories. Now, I will admit that the way that these things were presented in the Washington Post may have a different sort of tone.
Slightly different spin there.
Yeah, a little bit different perspective on it than I have. And I'm not going to suggest here, by the way, this is not some sort of comprehensive coverage of the budget proposal, which we all know is dead on arrival at Congress, as all presidential budget proposals are. And it spends too much and cuts too little and all that kind of stuff, blah, blah, blah. But let me get to the several structural things that I noticed about it, gentlemen. Number one is more control at the state and local level when it comes to entitlement spending. Now, of course, you hear about this in terms of the Trump administration's desire to starve the poor. Number two is the sale of federal assets, including Reagan and Dulles airports, as well as 2 D.C. area highways and a bunch of other federally owned properties, and the using of that money to fund infrastructure development. And number three is the tipping of the balance of infrastructure development towards state and local governments, meaning less federal spending, more incentive for state and local governments and private sector involvement in this. Representative Chuck Schumer, the Democrat, of course, portrayed this as a lack of direct investment that would leave out large parts of America. Only a Democrat could say that getting the federal remote control government out of the business of funding local infrastructure is a lack of direct investment. The federal government couldn't be more indirect. Anyway, number 4, reductions in spending on arts and culture through the National Endowments for the Arts and Humanities, through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and another organization with an acronym too long that has to do with museums and libraries. Opponents, of course, of this portray this as killing off the stimulus that creates jobs in the creative economy. And then finally, reductions in staffing that are already underway and have been for the past year at the Environmental Protection Agency, and then forthcoming reductions in staffing at the National Weather Service. And of course, what this means is that that we will all be drinking out of poisoned lakes, and that we will not be warned when it comes to storms and weather events, because some 248 forecasters at the National Weather Service. Can you imagine that there are 248 forecasters at the that's not just all the forecasters, that's just the ones that they plan to reduce the staffing by. So anyway, gentlemen, all of these things have, I think, a common thread that conservatives have wanted for years. Number one is that pushing of authority and responsibility down to the local level, and number two is actual cuts, not year over year reductions in the increase, but actual cuts in spending. Stephen Green, we know that this is all a fantasy, but what does it say to you that the big opposition to this in Congress is going to come when these plans all die in Republican-led committees?
Oh, Scott, you cynic, you. And you're probably exactly right. I also want to point out that the Washington Post, where you managed to sort of eke out the truth from these stories, their slogan, and I believe that they firmly believe their own slogan, is "Democracy dies unspun." Is that, did I get that right? I'm pretty sure I got
almost.
that right.
Yeah, that's pretty close.
Anyway, yeah. We need to ask some fundamental questions. Well, okay, first of all, I quipped yesterday that can you really call it a budget when the plan is to spend all of the money and then some forever? Because I'm not sure budget is the right word to describe that. The structural changes, provided they get through the House and then the Senate, would be welcome and nice. But the fact remains that we are on the entitlement derailing gravy train. even if we left, even if we kept taxes high and had no increases in spending, we would still be on track for trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye can see, starting in about a year and a half from now. Trump's budget in some ways moves that date a little closer. In other ways, he pushes it out a little bit. Paul Ryan is really the only guy talking seriously about serious entitlement reform that we need. But I don't think he can move the Republican caucus far enough in that direction. But I've got my hopes. We'll see. If Trump is willing to talk structure and Ryan is willing to talk entitlement reform, maybe between the two of them they can drag Mitch McConnell across a finish line somewhere. Until we tackle this huge issue, this entitlement issue, the rest of it, I'm afraid, amounts to little more than rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, Scott.
Bill Whittle, I think that that Republicans, as you well know, have had a messaging problem for years and years. And while we do fine in the echo chamber of our own supporters, because you say something that sounds tough and people cheer, and then you go on doing what you were doing before, which is nothing like what you said when you were talking tough. But I think the problem comes in that if we are going to get these ideas across the line, as Stephen Green suggested, then we can't do it with just the base of conservatives that is extant at the moment. We somehow have to be able to expand that. The only way to expand that, I believe, is to talk to the culture as it is, not the culture as you wish it were. Not the, you wish that everything wasn't about fairness and tolerance, but Bill, it really is about fairness and tolerance. So the only thing that bothers me about this whole Trump budget proposal is that I very much doubt and haven't seen yet any concerted effort to sell it other than proposing it, and to sell it in a way that reinforces the heartfelt need for fairness, not just among Democrats, but among Americans in general.
When's the last time you ever heard those principles actually sold? Ronald Reagan's the last time I can remember hearing anybody actually sell these principles as if they believed in them. This is, of course, what you have to do. I've come to realize that that the problem we have is extremely difficult, but it's actually simple. You know what I mean? It's not easy, but it's simple. And this is simply to tell the story of why we believe in all this stuff, because we believe it's better for people. And you can take any one of these numerous examples that you've given, and show why it's better for people, with the possible exception of the piss Christ artists. Those are the ones who suffer under the president's budget proposals. These avant-garde artists who are doing everything possible to mock the entire sensibility of the people who actually paid for the artwork. I kind of like to focus on the PBS thing and the National Endowment for the Arts, because it's probably the cleanest example of the question between whether or not this whole thing is a Philistine romp through the finer things in life, or is there in fact a deeper purpose for it? And the fact that so much of the virtually all of it, essentially, I can't think of any examples, all of the stuff that's produced by National Endowment of the Arts and National Public Television, all this stuff, is exceedingly left-wing. And it's obnoxious to ask half of the country, it's not just obnoxious, it's dishonest and wrong, to ask half of the country to pay for artists to openly mock everything they believe in. But even if all of the art they produced was conservative, it'd still be wrong. It'd be wrong for the right reasons. It'd be wrong because it is not the job of the federal government to go around paying for art. It's just not. You could conceivably make a case for those kind of expenditures in terms of science, basic research, conceivably, but this is the kind of thing this is why the government costs $4,000 billion a year. That's why, because everybody thinks the government's got to have a hand in everything, and look, we all know now, I've come to believe for several years now, that this money is never going to be repaid. And everybody knows it. And I don't know what that means. I do know that one big insight into this was that the issue is not whether or not the money will ever be repaid. The issue is, will the payments on the money continue to be made? Because that's why you make an investment, right? You invest in something in order to get a return. If I lend you, enough money to buy a house, I get monthly payments with interest. And as long as those payments keep coming, on some level, I suppose these people think this thing is working. Look, I don't know, Scotty. Any little sign of something positive is a good sign. But as Steve pointed out earlier, and what you were pointing out earlier in terms of selling this thing, the people we need to sell it to is not the American people. We need to sell it to the people of our own party who we elected there under the exact condition that they vote for these kind of things, and who lied through their teeth to us, and who continue to lie through their teeth to us. That's where the problem is.
Yeah, and Bill, even with the $3 trillion in tax cuts, the federal government, the Washington spending is set to grow from $4.1 trillion this year to $5.2 trillion just 5 years from now. So that's about a 25% increase in just 5 years in federal spending. And anybody who thinks the economy is going to grow that much in the next 5 years is smoking something.
And I'll just follow that up by saying that the average American doesn't care about anything that either of you just said. And
Probably not.
And the reason for that is because, no, I shouldn't say anything, but when it comes to the financial parts of it, the reason for that is there are two common conceptions out there. Number one is we're the richest country in the world. Number two is, therefore, everybody ought to have everything they need in this country. And it ought to be fair for everybody in this country. Those are the fundamental premises. Now, you can argue against that. You can say, well, holy cow, we've got $20 trillion in debt plus, the entitlement long-term debt that we have. And we are overspending our budget every year. And we don't even have a budget every year. And you can say all that stuff. But all that really matters is we're the richest country that the earth has ever seen. And there are still people who are hungry. And so if we're going to connect with people, even in our own party, as Bill suggested, I think that Republicans at the heart of it are people with heart, and so they think, oh my goodness, we don't want the poor to starve. Obviously, we need to stop talking about money and we need to start talking about the dignity of the individual. We need to start talking about your individual happiness. We need to start talking about how big government is just as bad as big corporations that crush your spirit. I mean, why in the world would you want to hand over any amount of arts money, so to speak, to an organization that's run by politicians who are cronied up with major corporations? That's insane. Yes. Why, if you think Google and Amazon are evil and Walmart is evil, well, why would you want to channel money to the people who are in the pay of Google, Amazon, and Walmart to maintain their power so that they can distribute that money to artists as if they were a monarch handing it to their favored people? That's the last thing in the world you would want. Why wouldn't you want local control? My goodness, we're talking to people who believe that you shouldn't eat anything that didn't grow 3 blocks away from you. We're talking to people who think that you should be eating nothing but eggs from free-range chickens that live in your neighbor's backyard. We should be talking about local control because it means liberty, because you will distribute fairness. But that guy in Washington, D.C., who odds on is going to be somebody who's not even in your party, is not going to be fair. All of these areas, I think we have a natural connection to the average liberal, frankly, to be able to say, look, you know what? Speak truth to power. Don't let the big fat cats in Washington, D.C. run your life. You want the government controlling all this land? No. Donald Trump wants to sell federal assets off. You don't want the federal government controlling every airport and highway and thousands upon thousands of acres of land. You want that in local control where local people really care about, do you not? There's a guy in, I want to say Chicago, that I read about. And he posted a tweet out on Twitter because he had some neighbors who needed to have snow shoveled from their sidewalks when they got hit by about a foot of snow. And he's done this before. He runs this kind of little non-profitable organization that goes around and with shovels and cleans off people's sidewalks and steps and stuff like that. Well, he put this message out on Twitter and it got amplified by Twitter. And instead of the normal, last time he did this, 10 people showed up down at the train or bus station where he was going to meet them. 120 people showed up. And they went out that afternoon and they They shoveled snow for little old ladies. And afterwards, they got together, and they were people of all kinds that got together. Some guy came from another state because he wanted to do it. A 70-year-old grandmother came with her snow shovel. Some people even said, where can we give you money so you can have a snowblower? He said, I can't take a snowblower. I don't have a place to put it. Right now, I just have some shovels in my garage. He went to a local store and bought some shovels. That is America. That is individual initiative. That is love. That is concern. And you can't get any of that at a great distance. And so, ladies and gentlemen, for want of a better word, I just want to applaud the Trump budget for what it says about you, for what it says about who Americans are. Even though I know it doesn't have a chance of passing, I think it makes some important statements, and I think we need to do a much better job of selling that to the average individual American. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching Right Angle. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.